Hello and welcome to the Colts Cover-2 podcast. I'm Joel A. Erickson. I'm joined, as always, by Nate Atkins. Nate, do you feel like you have any more clarity on whether or not Jonathan Taylor will return this week, next week, yesterday?
The only clarity that I've gotten on Jonathan Taylor this week is that he's good at saucing and tossing wings, chicken tenders, I should say. And that was actually his answer when we asked about if he's healthy enough to play. He says, I'm healthy enough to sauce and toss. So if that was just about tenders, then we don't know. If that was a metaphor for what they're going to do on the field, since they're trying to incorporate that as their next touchdown celebration, that could be something. But I don't know when that celebration might come. Maybe it comes on Sunday against the Dolphins. Maybe it comes in a month. I don't have any clarity beyond that because right now, if you don't go to Dairy Queen to see Jonathan Taylor sauce and toss, you're not going to see him because he doesn't show up at practice, even on the side. Like, I don't know what he's up to during these moments until we see him back on a practice field. But this is been 7 practices in a row that he hasn't been out there for and 2 games in there. So the last 9 times we've seen the Colts on a holding pattern until whenever that changes.
Does saucing and tossing require quick change of direction and or jump cuts? I'm unfamiliar with Dairy Queen's methods of food preparation.
It mostly just involves the health of your hips, which is why Anthony Richardson said he's not good at the toss part. Actually, he's good at the toss. He's not good at the sauce part, which is the move the hips and shake the bowl. So, that's where we are right now, is trying to parse these electric runners and figure out something about them by going to Dairy Queen.
Nate and I were joking about this earlier, but I wasn't able to go to the Dairy Queen event. My biggest takeaway wasn't, no offense to Nate, he did his best. My biggest takeaway wasn't anything on the injury front. I did not know Dairy Queen food was such a big deal. I would say that 98.7% of my purchases at Dairy Queen in my lifetime have been a blizzard. Maybe there's been like a dilly bar or something every once in a while, but like for the most part, like just ice cream. I really got into the rest of everything else in terms of other foods. So I'm unfamiliar with the saucing and tossing. Taylor wasn't out there today. If Taylor's not out there, I think this is why I wanted to start with this with the running backs. Trey Sermon is dealing with a knee injury. He's been dealing with stuff in previous weeks as well, but it seems to me that this one is a little bit more significant just because they signed Salvon Ahmed, the former Dolphins running back, to the practice squad to add some experience there. If Sermon can't go, I don't know. It feels like the running game, number one, I would have said I want Tyler Goodson to get more carries anyway. But it also feels like the running game is its fortunes, if Taylor isn't out there, are pretty much tied to whether or not Anthony Richardson can draw attention away from the running backs. Is that fair?
Oh, yeah. I was just looking it up from the Steelers game. Is the last time that we saw Anthony Richardson on the field, even though it was just for a quarter. But in that one quarter, he ran 3 times for 24 yards, so 8 yards a carry on 3 carries. But it's interesting to look at Jonathan Taylor in that game. So he had, in that game with Anthony Richardson on the field, 7 carries for 43 yards. With Anthony Richardson off the field, it was 14 carries for 45 yards. So big difference there. And I would argue that the backs who are not Jonathan Taylor need that help even more, because we saw Jonathan Taylor back in 2021 not have a lot of a quarterback run threat. That's not really how defenses looked at Carson Wentz or the Colts offense then. He won the rushing title, but so he can work with other quarterbacks, just not maybe get a boost from from Anthony Richardson. But these other running backs really need it, really need it a lot. And I think the best example of that we can point to where we've seen them with both players is Zach Moss. I'd have to go look up the numbers again, but Zach Moss was like a full yard per carry better with Anthony Richardson than he was with Gardner Minshew. So, yeah, there's an element of this. It's like we discussed like this offense and how effective it is with either quarterback. I think it's just too simplistic to just compare their passing numbers because this offense is designed to be a heavy rush offense, and that goes to the quarterback being able to run, but also what he does for everybody else. And so on Sunday, what I noticed a lot was the Titans would just send that backside defensive end streamlining to the running back when the Colts are in shotgun because they don't have to pay attention to that quarterback at all. And so when he's the backside defensive end, he can just sprint after Trey Sermon, who's not fast enough to run it away if he does that sort of stop and start action that he tries to do that hasn't been very effective. So it's tough right now. I mean, Trey Sermon, the bulk of his carries have been with Joe Flacco because he started the past two games with Anthony Richardson out. So 28 of his 37 carries have come in the past 2 weeks. Trey Sermon right now, out of 62 running backs who are on pace for at least 100 rushing attempts, ranked 62nd in yards per carry. So right now you have a team that has a pretty good offensive line. It was a great offensive line until Will Fries went down, and we'll see kind of just how good it is. But I think you'd say it's still a pretty good offensive line, but they're not running the ball well because they have backup running backs who are in the issues compounded by having no quarterback run threat. And so when it's like that, it just puts a ton of pressure on them to create everything through the air. And that is a bit of a challenge too with, what Michael Pittman Jr. is going through right now. So given the context of everything going on with this team, Will Fries out, Michael Pittman Jr. is going to be limited maybe the rest of the way, at least you'd think, until he can get some time off, either with the bye week or, if they decide to finally sit him some. Jonathan Taylor becomes more important than ever, but also Anthony Richardson to boost that run game becomes more important than ever. So getting both out there is just so much different than having neither one out there, I think.
Yeah. The Richardson of the run game is tough to somewhat put into perspective, like what he's going to do with these running backs. I don't think neither Sermon nor Goodson so far has given you the indication that they can play the same way Zach Moss did last year. But also Richardson himself can give you yards. He's averaging over 6 yards per carry this season, and they desperately need something. So they broke the 100-yard mark in every one of the first 4 games, including the opener when the Texans bottled up Taylor pretty good. They have not broken the 100-yard mark in the last 2 without Richardson and Taylor in the lineup. And this, I think it matters this week against the Dolphins. I think it's going to matter this week against the Dolphins how they run, because the Miami Dolphins defense has Kendall Fuller and Jalen Ramsey at cornerback, and they are very, very banged up front. They are essentially all of their edge rushers are gone, which matters for the running game as well. This is a Dolphins team that's 23rd in the NFL in yards per carry allowed. So you want to have the running game going, whatever it takes, whether it's Richardson, whether it's Goodson, whether it's some combination of Goodson and Sermon and Ahmed and Richardson. You want to have it going against this team because they don't have their edge rushers to rush the passer, but they also have very, very good veteran corners who can make Anthony Richardson see some things he hasn't seen before.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing is it's twofold here, where I think Anthony Richardson gives them a better chance to win as they're currently constructed, because with Michael Pittman Jr. limited, they need to lean on the run game and everything he opens up there. But it's also the fact that even when he does have his struggles, if they're the way we've seen with completion percentage or some taking care of the ball, I mean, those are ways he's got to grow too. So the Colts, it's Richardson, and just he needs those reps. He needs that time to go through these challenges and learn. And what you'd really like to see is him build week to week. And it seemed like they were in a spot early in the season to do that. It just was a lot more bad than good from Richardson when it came to passing. But, that Steelers game, we just didn't really get to see how this would develop, because it was the Bears game, the one time he's played in the game, won the game, and finished it. It was one of his most inaccurate days passing. And the conversation feels like forever ago now, but the conversation out of that game was, how does he settle his accuracy down? And he talked about finding ways in his footwork when he'd get excited and leave his feet unnecessarily, and he was going to work on that. Well, the next week out against the Steelers, we only saw 4 pass attempts, but it was a lot better. The process looked a lot better. He missed one throw, but he hit the other 3 and a couple of very impressive passes, and we just need to see more of it. We need to see how he plays throughout a whole game. Can he put a game together? Can he put multiple games together that are better accuracy than before? Can this go in the right direction? We've talked about so many times in this podcast that accuracy is kind of a long process when it comes to getting someone who needs to grow a lot. So for Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, those guys played a ton to eventually get to a point in year 2 and year 3 as starters where that accuracy made incremental jumps to the point where they could be in the 60% completion rate. Anthony Richardson right now is at 50, and he's got to play to get that better. That's just kind of what has to happen. And it happens in a few different ways. It happens with fixing some of those mechanical things, I think helps. I think building chemistry with some of these receivers that he didn't really get to throw too much last season when he didn't play a lot. And we're seeing his first 2 starts this year were without Josh Downs. The third start, Josh Downs was admittedly very limited, still working back to the ankle injury. So he's really had, however long that was, did he even get a full game with – I don't think he's even had a full game with Josh yet. I think it was the Steelers game that he got hurt. But Josh Downs has broken out 3 straight really great games of high-volume production. That's the guy I wanted to see Anthony play with, because I think there's something to be said for when they, giving him some easier completions, but also getting Anthony in a rhythm and getting him to trust and just see kind of the ball go through the hoop on some of those completions. For Josh Downs is pretty critical for this. And yeah, it feels like everything with this team has been on pause until we see 5-28 out there. So I just hope we are not having this exact same podcast in a week from now. At least one of them back out there, please.
They were together in the Chicago game. Richardson started. That was Downs' first game back, and he only got 32 snaps, but that's because the Colts only ran 56 plays in that game. So that's the one time they've been together for the full game so far. Other than that, not much. So I was looking at the Dolphins. The Dolphins are kind of an interesting. They've got those corners. They don't have any edge rushers at all. Barry Jackson from the Miami Herald tweeted this earlier. Emmanuel Ogbah is dealing with an unknown injury, or at least it was unknown earlier this week. Or earlier today, I mean. I haven't seen if there's anything different. But they don't have a single healthy edge player who has a sack this season. Not one. Now, the weird thing is, I don't know that affects. I don't know that affects Richardson's passing that much, because the Colts have generally been pretty good from a protection standpoint, with the exception of some hiccups from Braden Smith against the Jaguars. They've been generally very good. I think they're in the top 10 in sacks allowed per pass attempt. And the other thing is, Richardson often misses when he's got a clean pocket, not when he's got a messy pocket. So it's weird. It's weird to be thinking about a team not having any edge rushers at all, any proven edge rush at all is not necessarily a huge deal. But is it kind of not necessarily a big deal given what we know?
Yeah, it's weird. That has not, of the many ways that Anthony Richardson has struggled in the limited time he's been out there, it hasn't ever felt related to edge rushers or pressure. Not really. The best is like there's been a couple times when he's had to step backwards and he's lofted throws. That's more like when a blitz comes late. But no, especially the way that the Colts are built as a team. I mean, this is not exactly the same with Will Fries being down, but they've not had protection issues really. They give him time. It's just he needs to be able to work through some of these things. It's to me, it's more about kind of how are you able to play with your safeties? You know, are you able to take away that deep ball? And do you have a chance to stop the run while doing that? That to me is more the recipe for handling Anthony Richardson. But I don't know, the whole thing is it's getting hard to conceptualize exactly who Anthony Richardson is or is going to be until we see him back out there, because I feel like we've already seen 3 different versions of him this season, which is one version that's, really inaccurate and erratic, one version that was scratching the surface of being, explosive as a runner and we've seen a version of him that's explosive as a runner and a passer that's just kind of comes and goes. And then we've seen the version that, he's for the last 2 weeks, which is the one that's not out there because of an injury that happens, which is kind of the looming threat for him. So it would just be nice if we could ever get him, get him healthy and get him fully out there. Maybe that was their logic. And, this week they didn't push him to play in Tennessee. It sounds like he could have. He was the emergency quarterback. And then immediately they say he's back and he's good. They want to get him to 100%. So maybe that's sort of the idea, is try to get over this hurdle not once and for all, but get him fully 100% back out there to where he's not one of these compromised versions of himself, and see where that goes. What I'm curious to see though is, even let's say he steps out there this week and there's just 0 lingering effects from that hip injury. I'm curious to see what they do with him as a runner. That's been kind of the tricky spot Shane Steichen's been in all year with him, where it felt like, early on when there was talk about, the comparison to Steph Curry, we don't want to limit Steph Curry, his ability to shoot 3-pointers. Anthony Richardson's running is like that. They were going to do it, and they did in the opener. When he took a lot of those big hits in the opener, they really didn't do it at all the next week and really into the Bears game. Then they kind of brought it back against the Steelers, and then that's when he got hurt. So and Shane Steichen has expressed some regret at bringing him back in to that Steelers game and running him near the goal line, and then he doesn't play the next 2 weeks. So not because of that hit, but that was the risk that presented itself there. So I don't know. It's very a lot up in the air as far as what we're actually going to get out of this guy, and especially him with Jonathan Taylor versus him without. It could be a different thing, but mostly for the run game, I guess. But there even may be a point where I don't know. What I want to see though is if they're out there enough. Once you get to a point where Jonathan Taylor's really rolling, that's going to shift defenses to try to take him away and give Anthony Richardson some opportunities to keep the ball and run. And so there's a lot of intrigue. I feel like we're still talking about it the way we were in the preseason, because we just have only gotten little fits and starts and tastes of what this could actually be. And it's time to get to see it again.
Michael Pittman Jr. said something interesting today about how they're expecting to get a lot of zone coverage now, because you can't play man against Anthony without giving up the possibility of the run. That's interesting. I think you're already going to see some zone and some shell coverage because people are worried about what Pierce is going to do to them deep. Steichen's done a good job of getting them open no matter what. So a lot of it just comes down to Richardson has to complete more passes. Not like a ton more, but if he's going to keep throwing the deep ball, but he's got to complete more passes. They do need the injection of explosiveness back, though. Flacco was trending downwards in terms of yards per attempt. He's down to 6.6 for the season. You want to be at 7.5 or above. Richardson's at 8.5. Now there's been some inconsistency that's come with that, but this offense has to have an element of both. It has to be both efficient and explosive. And too many times this season it's been one or the other. And like Sunday, for example, it was it was efficient at times, but not really explosive in terms of they were completing passes but not getting anywhere.
So it's
There have been
interesting. Flacco, sorry to catch up, but Flacco, he started 10 quarters or played 10 quarters, I guess 11 quarters. I'd say one of those quarters showed explosiveness, right? That quarter, I mean, that fourth quarter was
Alec
wild
quarter.
in Jacksonville. But yeah, it's felt like that with when he stepped in the Steelers game there. It's not like it's all Joe Flacco's fault. That is going to affect the explosiveness of the whole backfield, but it's hard to find out ways to generate that if Jonathan Taylor's not out there. Whereas with Anthony Richardson, if he's out there but there's no Jonathan Taylor, he can be an explosive runner and he can still bring some of that explosive passing. And that's the thing too, is like one of those guys just changes the way that you play defense. Is that if the run game can get going with Anthony Richardson back there and everything we laid out, once in a while, at the very least, a team's going to bring that safety down into the box, and that's when you can go deep. Right now, the Joe Flacco, Trey Sermon setup is just not forcing teams to do that. They're going to just sit back in that too high shell and make you drive the whole way. That was like the whole Jaguars game, was just taking all these underneath plays until they finally game. So yeah, it's trying to get a setup for explosive plays. It's not just that Anthony Richardson is like just that much better at throwing those than Joe Flacco is. Joe has a big arm too, but it's trying to get the personnel mismatches in the first place, which I think is what Shane Steichen's actually best at, is when you do give him some of those, that's when he can really dial stuff up and get you those explosive plays.
I think for this game against the Dolphins, Richardson, obviously, anytime Richardson's on the field, really anytime the quarterback's on the field, no matter what, that's going to take precedence. But I really think that the key to this game is whether or not the Colts defense, which has struggled a lot this season, can keep the Dolphins in the funk they're in offensively. This is a Dolphins team that has not been over 5 yards per play since the opener. Now that coincides with Tua Tagovailoa getting hurt in the second game against Buffalo. Their quarterback is Snoop Huntley. Their non-Tua quarterbacks are averaging something like 5.4 yards per attempt. But I think you would probably agree with me. There's a couple of different, reasons to be concerned with this team. I think number one, Mike McDaniel does a good job running the football. He does a good job running the football. We've seen this Colts team give up yards at times. And not only does he do a good job running the football, they do a good job running the football outside.
Yeah, I mean, Mike McDaniel's kind of known for, he was the guy in San Francisco with, Kyle Shanahan rightly gets tons of credit for what they've built with the Niners, but Kyle Shanahan's his most natural area is the passing game, and Mike McDaniel was the guy in charge of the run game. So when you think back to like how Deebo Samuel became that multifaceted Deebo Samuel, that was a lot of Mike McDaniel creation with a player that obviously has a credible skill set. So it hasn't necessarily travel all the time, but they do enough of that in Miami where you just look at some of their rushing stats, just how many guys they get involved with this thing can be kind of interesting. I mean, to different levels of success, but like since they've had to move off Tua, and they brought in Tyler Huntley for the past 2 starts. They haven't used him a ton, but he has 11 carries, 47 yards, and a touchdown. So it's sort of like you have to envision them doing a lot of what if I'm them, I just take the exact game plan that the Packers used against this team with Malik Willis, where you have a backup quarterback who's limited passer, but he has some legs that can help you. And then you just kind of combine that with get 3 different threats and use motion to kind of out leverage and get to the edge. They can do that where they don't have as good of a runner. I don't like a just straight up runner as Josh Jacobs, but they do have some options of guys to motion around, and get the ball to. Even some of the running backs, Devon Achane is that fast and explosive that you want to find ways to get him to the edge. So I'd have to kind of look into some of their other players to see who would be more the receiver to do that part of it. But still, they're gonna you've talked about this too, like there's other plays that like coaches will talk about as just extension of the run game, advantage plays, screens, or pitches and quick motions and stuff like that. And that's Mike McDaniel's game. So there's going to be plays that will go in the box score as a pass play, but our run plays in nature. And that's when I think he'll try to get the ball to Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, get their speed to the edges. So sort of one of those things we're going to try to get the Colts focused, get them in base defense and focused on the run, and then just try to spread them out. And going to really test some of these good tests where the Colts have come as a run defense since week 2, where I don't know that much is different in the personnel right now. Like they had Kwity Paye that game, they'll have him now. They did have Tyquan Lewis back then. They don't now, but that was the game they lost to DeForest Buckner in. So if DeForest Buckner, we haven't seen him back yet, so that seems less likely. But if he is, at best limited. So it's probably a similar overall challenge for the Colts defense. Difference being they're at home and they've gotten better since then. That was a month ago, but it's going to be the same kind of mismatches that Mike McDaniel is going to hunt for with a mobile backup quarterback and really fast players who can win with motion. So I imagine he just takes that exact playbook. And if you can build a lead for Mike McDaniel's perspective, if you can build a lead for Tyler Huntley, you're going to try and keep him out of situations where he has to make any difficult throws. And the Titans were close to getting that same formula until Michael Pittman Jr. scored that touchdown, and then they had to throw, and they threw the interception. But that formula has been there that the Colts have been up against it in a couple of these different games against mobile but not very good quarterbacks. So this just feels like another game where that's what they're faced with.
Yeah, they beat the Patriots. They beat the Patriots with Huntley at quarterback by running the ball 41 times for 193 yards, 4.7 per rush. They only threw it – well, they threw it 31 times. They ran 75 plays in that game. But they only threw it for 194 yards. It was 5.3 yards per attempt. It's pretty – I feel like it's pretty easy to see coming what Mike McDaniel's going to want to do. He's going to try to ratchet up those carries. Tyreek Hill has 4 carries this season, so you have to worry about him as a runner. You already alluded to this, but you have to worry about him as a runner in addition to a receiver. I think the other thing – and maybe the thing that would concern me the most if I was Gus Bradley is Huntley has not really pushed the ball down the field. It's 5.5 yards per attempt. They're not really throwing deep right now. But it's still Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. And both of those guys can get downfield pretty well. And I feel like if you give up, 1 or 2 lightning shot plays, then this game has a chance to really get into Mike McDaniel's hands and play the way they want to really fast. Now, I assume they play back. You can't, but at the same time, I wonder, do you play back when you're expecting them to run? I don't know. It's this Dolphins, the way that the Colts defense is playing makes this Dolphins game trickier than it has to be, or than it should be, just given how bad the Dolphins have been on offense.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's if it's the Dolphins that played 2 weeks ago and got blown out by the Titans, then you would just look at that and think, well, the Colts at least were head-to-head with the Titans and ended up beating the Titans. But, of course, that's not how the NFL actually goes. It's like the Dolphins are searching for solutions to a very big problem, which is not having Tua out there when everything in their offense is built around – their offensive system is built around accurate passes outside the numbers to 2 superstar wide receivers who get the ball and just – can take it anywhere. They're just not – their passing game's not in that place. So they don't have the upside that – like we said, that Malik Willis Packers type of offense that I think they got to last week against at least decent Patriots defense. So, yeah, but it's the same sort of thing where, the reverse can be true where if the Colts are able to get going on offense and find some explosiveness, they've been able to score on their opening script, and then they pretty much go silent after that the past 2 weeks. But if they can get Anthony Richardson back out there to where that run threat, that quarterback run, and the lanes it opens up makes this so they can build like a double-digit lead. If they can put the game on Tyler Huntley to make throws out of structure and out of basic advantage plays, then that's where they can put the game more in a pass rush that has to really get going too. So that's the other thing has been that the Colts have gone, it's 9 quarters now in a row since their last sack, and some of that has been the injuries, some of that has been they're not really in putting themselves in a lot of situations to rush the passer, and then they just have to get some of these guys healthier, like Kwity Paye, and get going again, like Latu. But this is like, I don't know. This is where if they could build a double-digit lead to where Tyler Huntley has to answer in ways that are not just kind of slow, methodical run play drives, that's where the pass rush really needs to have a moment where it gets going again. And their last real moment, I felt like, was they won the Bears game, I think, but since then it's been a big time drought. This needs to be one of those games that the Colts hit a certain threshold of offensive output, force the ball into Tyler Huntley's hands, and the pass rush has to make some plays. Because I do think that version of Tyler Huntley, the one that really has to go make the plays to win the game, that's the one that the Colts want to see, not the one that's sort of a runner who's hidden from sight.
Yeah, it's kind of like last week with Levis. They weren't really running Levis, but the Titans were doing everything they could to make Levis not make plays. The Dolphins are probably going to do the same with Huntley. You're kind of in the same game again. The one last thing I wanted to talk about on this pod, there's some questions asked to Shane Steichen about Anthony Richardson's ability to play through pain. I'm curious to get your take on it. Shane Steichen famously coached Phillip Rivers, who I don't know if Colts fans remember this as well as maybe everyone does, but Phillip Rivers played 252 consecutive games in the NFL. He played on a torn ACL in an AFC Championship game. He played through a very significant back injury for a long time in San Diego. While he was here in Indianapolis, he played through a toe injury. He was also sort of famous for never talking about his injuries. It was the only thing Phillip wouldn't talk about was injuries. His own, we had to find out about how severe his toe was from Quentin Nelson. And there was some interesting stuff. Like Shane Steichen said, and this is something I've kind of been saying for a while, which is no matter who the quarterback is, they're going to get hurt. It doesn't matter if they're a passing quarterback. It doesn't matter if they're a rushing quarterback. They're going to get hurt. It's just to what extent, how much can they play through it? Some questions today from people wondering, does Richardson need to learn to play through pain? What's your? I have a one thought on it. I want to hear what you have first.
Well, it's interesting because what Shane mentioned is different, from Phillip Rivers, is that the style of player they are, and that Anthony Richardson needs to use his legs, both as a design runner, but also a guy who scrambles. And that's just going to put him in situations where the ball's in his hands longer and more. That's kind of the same explanation he gave, when I asked about, Michael Pittman Jr. is allowed to play through any levels of pain right now. But he talked about the difference in one difference being that Anthony touches it every play and holds the ball. So there's just hits you're inviting to him. And it's sort of it's a risk thing, but it's also a effectiveness where you think of Phillip Rivers, certainly those many injuries he played with limited him in ways, but for a quarterback who wasn't really going to move and can get the ball out quickly, there was a path for him to play and find success in his natural style while playing that way. Whereas on Sunday, this past Sunday, if they determined that Anthony Richardson can't really throw downfield very well, and he can't be a design runner, then he just doesn't really have a route to success. You could play him, you could make him go out there and take the risk and just force him to try to grow as a accuracy, shorter range, get the ball out faster type of quarterback. But that's not how he's ever going to actually play. So it's having him develop that way, I think, is also problematic. It just doesn't seem very helpful. And also, I just don't think it'd be effective at all. The Anthony Richardson we've seen so far is not going to win just completing a high rate of passes and not going for deep shots or running the ball, if that's where they were. So there's couple different conversations, I think, between, is it a matter of playing through pain, just making him go do that and be that kind of guy, versus is he able to do certain functions of his job that are essential to how he succeeds? I have a feeling it's more the latter. It's one of those many things I wish Shane would get more into detail on with this to flesh this out, because we're kind of having to guess on this. But it just seems like they're just two very different styles of quarterback. And then you're adding in the added element of, you don't want re-injury or more injury or sideline in because he needs those reps. I don't know. I think part of it too is just that, like, this version of Anthony Richardson, while he's still developing, is not, isn't an amazing player yet. So the backup option you have in Joe Flacco, you can still win with. Whereas I think those teams that were built around Phillip Rivers, trying to go to the backup is not the same thing. So it just feels like there's a lot of different factors that are making this different, but it's weird. It's definitely a tough look for Anthony, just the way that it's played out, and the way that, the way that we haven't really gotten explanation on it is it does have a lot of people questioning his pain tolerance and ability to play at less than 100%. And I know it's started to bother him. It's always kind of bothered him because it's gone back to the ways that some people talked about him in college. But that's the narrative right now, that he's got to, at some point, he's just got to have to play and stay on the field and answer that, because that's kind of the image that's in a lot of people's head right now.
Yeah. So we're kind of you and I are on the same wavelength here. I think the biggest thing is, like, we've seen mobile quarterbacks or more mobile quarterbacks play on injuries before. I think, like, during the good Russell Wilson days in Seattle, there were a couple of sprained MCLs that I'm thinking of in my head. I know during the mobile Aaron Rodgers era, before this current gray grizzled version of the Jets Aaron Rodgers, that he had a couple of significant, there was a calf injury one time, there was a fractured bone another time that he played through by being more stationary. I just think that the Colts are being realistic about it, and based on what we've seen from Richardson as a passer, he can't play stationary like that. Not right now, which is what you've already said. That's like, when he gets to a point where he's throwing better, maybe he can do that. But I also went back to a couple of years ago. So this is a player that we haven't talked about in a while. Lamar Jackson, who also is obviously a very mobile quarterback, does a lot with his feet. There was a big storyline a couple of years ago that he shouldn't have sat out the Ravens playoff game at the end of the 2022 season. There's been some question about whether he could play through leg injuries before. He has said I think he said something about he wants to be closer to 100% than he does not. I'm trying to find the exact quote because I don't want to put words in his mouth. But there was another thing around that, and to me that's interesting because it's the same type of player. It's the same type of player, same type of quarterback. And if you watch Jackson, like, he doesn't have the same accuracy concerns that Richardson does at this point, but he does play a darting, dipping, scrambling style, and you take a lot away from him if he's not playing that way. So that, just thinking around the league and thinking about other quarterbacks, I think that's what it comes down to, is Richardson's just not ready to play an immobile version of himself. And it's possible that, like, he's not going to be able to do that even if he reaches his potential, just because of the way he plays right now.
Yeah, I think there's two ends of that both point to the same conclusion that you just laid out very well, which is, number one, it's like one of those guys, you can play with Phillip Rivers in a way where you can make sure he doesn't get hit very much. Just get the ball out quickly. There's not a way for Lamar Jackson or Anthony Richardson to do that in a way that's not just completely ineffective. At least like Anthony Richardson. And even Lamar Jackson, like you said, he's definitely more accurate than Anthony Richardson, but that's not a very good version of him to play that way, where it can be a good version of Phillip Rivers if he cannot move, but you're just going to get the ball out quickly, make sure he doesn't get hit. So part of it is like that. You're keeping more hits off of him the way you call the game, but you can't do it when the guy's a mobile quarterback, unless in most instances, unless it's sort of a, maybe you could do it with Kyler Murray if it's just have him scramble and throw and get away from people. That's just risky. I think there was some of that with Russell Wilson at times, but certainly guys who are design runners, that's a lot harder. But yeah, it's also like, what body part do they need essential to do the task? Is that body part working? So it's like if Phillip Rivers or if a pocket quarterback has an injury that's lower body, a leg injury, a foot injury, any of that, it certainly hurts and it's painful and it's harder to play through that. But that arm, the thing that makes them who they are, the arm and the mind is still there. Whereas like Anthony Richardson right now, his best trait is his legs and his ability to run and maneuver, and same thing with Lamar Jackson. So if those are the compromised areas, it'd be different. It's like if there's a version of like Lamar Jackson, if he had an injury that maybe limited just the downfield throwing, but everything else was fine, he could still be a super effective player. So it's like, it's the type of injury they're trying to work around. This is admittedly a terrible example because of the way things played out. But you think about 2 years ago with Matt Ryan when he had the shoulder injury. And then we were talking about, like, do they play him through that? And even though it was very painful, he was going to play through it. Well, there was no way to play through it. Like, he didn't have – the only thing he had was mind and what you hoped was something left in the arm. So when there was nothing left in the arm, there just was nothing physically left to give at all. Whereas if it had been a lower body injury for Matt Ryan, maybe different discussion. Again, I understand that's a bad example because ultimately what we remember about that situation is there was no salvaging it either way. But it's more about the point here I'm trying to make is just like, what body part do you need working? And, if it's something that affects either for Anthony Richardson, either the deep passing or the running, that just changes them in a dramatic way. And then especially, I think like you hinted to this, it's also like where they're at in their development stage. We're like, I don't know, if we're in year 8 with Anthony and he's where Lamar Jackson is now as a passer, and we get to a point where we say, well, he can't run. Can you get by for a game of just focusing more on the passing? You hope you're at a spot where that's a conversation that's so far from where they're at right now. That's just Anthony Richardson, accurate passing, consistent passing. That's not what he's going to be able to offer. It's just all unfortunate because the thing he needs is reps. So it's like you're looking for reasons to not give him reps out of prudence and making sure he has a good version of him out there. But at some point he also has to be out there. So you're just hoping. The hope is that he's missed 2 games this year. Mobile quarterbacks miss games sometimes.
Non-mobile quarterbacks miss games sometimes.
If Anthony Richardson were to finish this year with like 14 starts, it'd be a great year. Now that means only missing 1 more game. But that's the hope, is that this is a 2-week situation that was very strange and unfortunate. So far it feels recurring for him. They've got to get over that hurdle to where it's not recurring and it's just a blip in the whole thing. Because eventually he does need to just string a bunch of games together and build one game to the next. It's just like, that is what we're never seeing. We've yet to see a game where Anthony Richardson plays great from start to finish and wins the game and finishes the game. It's like that. It's that image of all Anthony can be, because his upside is so high. That's still what we're hanging on to, is that image. And I think that's still it's still fine to do that while he's the youngest quarterback in the NFL. Like I'm still pretty high on his abilities, but that's what everyone. It's still like a theoretical thing until we actually see it.
Richardson was a full participant in practice. That came out while we were taping it. Lots of other Colts were not. Well, we've always said this, but you have to wait till the end of the week to get a good idea for whether or not they're going to play. But maybe this is the chance for Richardson to get out there against the Dolphins and start a string of games where he's on the field and we don't have to worry about talking about injury for a little bit. For the Colts Cover-2 podcast, I'm Joel A. Erickson. This has been Nate Atkins. We'll be back to talk to you after whatever happens on Sunday against the Miami Dolphins.